Hello everyone, thank you for attending the penultimate lecture in the series. This one is called Blessings of Ife, and you shall see why as we proceed. Now last week I mentioned the Yoruba in the lecture, the African Quartet, looking at the influence of African art on the Parisian scene of the first 2 decades of last century. And I mentioned that development, his introduction had been partly through some sculptures that he saw in this bar after a day's painting. Now 2 of them were Baule pieces, and the other one was the Yoruba. So as we proceed through this lecture, I'm going to demonstrate to you why development was so enraptured by the Yoruba art. Okay, so let's start with the Yoruba creation story. So the Yoruba are the main ethnicity in southwest Nigeria. So if you think of Nigeria, in the north, which is mainly Islamic, the main ethnicity there are the Hausa. If we look in the southeast, the main ethnicity are the Igbo, or otherwise called the Igbo. And then in the southwest, the main ethnicity are the Yoruba people. Okay, their creation story goes, I mean, there are variations on this, but the main thread is that Oloron, one of the names for, and before I go on, I should say that throughout Africa, before the coming of Islam and Christianity, all the societies, the sub-Saharan societies, were monotheistic. There was a belief in one God. So for instance, amongst the Ashanti, it was called Nyame. Amongst a lot of people of East Africa, such as the Maasai, and such people is called Unkai or Ungai. Amongst the Shona, it's called Umwari, and so forth. And so one of the names for that the Yoruba give to God is Oloron. So Oloron sent one of the other deities down on a chain from heaven, and he was called Obatula. But what happened, on his way down, he got inebriated. He got stuck into some palm wine, and yeah, he couldn't he couldn't make it down here. So then one of the other deities, Oduduwa, took on the role. So he came down here, he had a chicken with him and a calabash full of earth. And what happened, he spread the, he placed the earth on the water, and the chicken scratched around and spread the earth around, and that's how we had land. Now, Oloron kind of felt sorry for Obatula, so he gave him another chance. He said, okay, you can create humanity. But once again, he got stuck into the palm wine and couldn't finish the job, or finished it in a haphazard fashion. And what happened is that it resulted in the first people with disabilities. So that's why he's kind of the protective figure of those with physical disabilities, and why palm wine is taboo for the followers of Obatula. So Obatula became the deity of human creation, and Oduduwa became the deity of creation of the world, and he became the first king or Oba of Ife. And Ife is what you call the spiritual heartland of the Yoruba people, like Kumasi is for the Ashanti in Ghana, sometimes called Ile Ife or just Ife. And before we go on, I just want to say that they were then formed into states. Now, when we think of city-states, we tend to think of Venice or Genoa in Italy, and their kind of importance to the trade across the Mediterranean. We never think of the East African city-states and their importance to the medieval trade across the Indian Ocean. And if you go over onto the west side of the continent, there's the city-states of the Wolof of Senegal, the city-states of the Akan of Ghana, and the city-states of the Yoruba of Nigeria. So there's states such as Owo and Oyo, and obviously Ife, which, as I say, is the spiritual heartland of the Yoruba, and where they believe the world began. When Oduduwa created the world and Obatula created humanity, it all happened in Ife, or Ile Ife. Okay, and they are, as I say, they are of monotheistic belief, but there's about 400 deities. So, for instance, there's Oshun, goddess of fertility. There's Eshu, messenger god, often called the trickster god. There's Ogun, the deity of iron, and such forth. So what we're going to start off now, I'm actually going to read something that I've written about Ogun. As I said, he's the god of iron and metal. And because he's the god of iron and metal, he incorporates a whole host of professions and skills and crafts into his belief. And he's also the patron saint of craftsmen, because you think the sculpture needs, you know, his hammer and his chisels, and these are made of iron and such forth. So he's also the god of the smiths and the craftsmen and the sculptors. So this is called the humble barber, because, as you can imagine, a barber is definitely dependent on iron for his livelihood. So this is called the humble barber. I'm just a humble barber, yet Ogun always blesses my tools, the scissors and the razor, spirit of iron and metallurgy, of he who hunts the antelope and he who drives a taxi. Watching over my cutting in the morning, still awake when I cut at night. Above me, watching over the engine and the pilot of the flight. He of the mighty machete who cut the path to Ile Ife, heartland of the Yoruba. I hear them calling his name, the blacksmith and the mechanic, the engineer as well as the butcher. At the shrine in my house, I celebrate him every day before the jobs of cut and shave. I've done so since I remember. I'll continue to do so until they take me to my grave. At the annual Olojo festival, the biggest of all our festivities, all of Ife remember him. Some bring in palm wine, others cola nut or plantain, I with a calabash of roasted yam. To thank him for giving me customers as well as a steady hand, so there's always food for my family. Heading the procession are the priests, plus the dignitaries, preceded by the Oni. In the field this morning, I heard the hunters singing their songs called Igala. And in this procession now, someone leads the singing, accompanied by the drummers. They lay their offerings first, the Oni and the others, those first in the line. When laying my roasted yams, my heart wells up, leaning at Okom Ogun shrine. I feel privileged to be a heartland man, a resident of Ile Ife, where Oduduwa first laid his earthly head. I'll never be a rich man, but I am a contented one, working in my barber's shed. So I pray to the great master of metals, lighthouse to the ship, watchman of the incoming plane, to watch over the Yoruba, keep a vigil over Nigeria, till I come to Oko Megun Shrine again. Okay, so that gives you an introduction to Ogun, who is the deity of iron and metals. Okay, Ife. The people of Ife have produced some of the greatest art, I think, that has been produced from the 12th century onwards. Before I show you some of the art that was produced there, I'm just going to read you some quotes by some people who have been impressed by the Ife art, and particularly the head, which is in the British Museum. Okay, so the first one is by Professor William Bascom. Now, he wrote an article for the Illustrated London News in 1938, because what happened is Leo Frobenius, a German academic, was the first one in 1910 to discover this art, and then it was forgotten. But in 1938, this artwork was unearthed again and caused this sensation. So he wrote this article for the Illustrated London News in 1938. But what I must say before I read these is that Frobenius, like a lot of people of the time, couldn't believe that the people of Africa had produced this art. He actually thought that it was some kind of distant Greek community. He actually thought that it was Atlantis. He actually thought that he had found the legendary Atlantis. He couldn't believe that Africans had produced this art. Okay, so I'm just going to read you these quotes. So the first one is by William Bascom, who, as I said, wrote this article for the Illustrated London News. So the heading said, "Mysterious Ife bronzes, African art worthy to rank with the finest works of Italy and Greece." So then he goes on to say, "Little that Italy, Greece or Egypt ever produced could be finer, and the appeal of their beauty is immediate and universal." Then we go on to a quote by Ben Okri, the famous novelist and poet. He says, "Personally, I look at it and I'm struck by its tranquility, its upward gaze. It's not just a tranquility of power, it's a tranquility of being in an inner sanctum. Personally, it has the effect on me that certain sculptures of the Buddha have. The presence of tranquility in a work of art speaks of a great civilization, because you can't have the tranquility without reflection. You can't have the tranquility without having asked the great questions about your place in the universe and having answered those questions to some degree of satisfaction. And that, for me, is what civilization is." Okay, and then the great David Attenborough, one of my heroes, says, "I think one is first of all struck by the huge technical competence. So it's a major craftsman, a major skill, whoever it was who produced that. But more than that, it is someone with a sensitivity to form and shape. And the head has great humanity, great presence. And to find in Ife a head which rivaled in accomplishment the finest naturalism of the Greek Elgin marbles or whatever was a huge surprise." Okay, Professor Babatunde Lawal says, "And then of course today many Africans and Nigerians in particular are proud of their past, a past that was downgraded as being crude, primitive in the past. And then to realize that their ancestors were not as backward, as it were, as they were portrayed. It was a double source of joy to them. This discovery unfurled a new kind of joy to them. This discovery unfurled a new kind of nationalism in them, and they started walking tall, feeling proud of their past, to energize their quest for identity in the global village that our world has become." And the last quote, a short one, is by Claude Adouen, who was at that time the head of the Africa section of the British Museum. He says, "It's not only beautiful, it's clearly a masterpiece. And it has no price as a masterpiece. It's priceless." Okay, let me show you some of the art, some of the Ife art. Lovely. This is one of the motifs of the Ife art, the rings on the neck. These holes, it is believed, well, general consensus now believes that these holes were used for the attachment of hair, beaded hair. And the ones up top were used as an attachment because what they think is that these were used in a funeral ceremony. So a crown was attached to the top, and this head was fixed to a wooden effigy. So these were something that was used in a funeral. And you can imagine how stunning that must have looked with the crown on top and the beaded beard. Okay, this here is a mask, and it's associated with one of the early Obas or kings called Obalufon. And he's the one who is said to have brought the bronze casting to Ife. So he's one of the early kings. Isn't it beautiful? I mean, when we talk about a natural take on things, it's just astounding. I mean, you can see why everyone was just transfixed by this art. Okay, so this is similar to the head that is in the British Museum. This is thought to be a head of a female dignitary. Now, as you'll see, this one here has got scarification on it. This one hasn't. Now, it is believed that there were two dynasties, basically one which was smooth-faced and one which had the scarification on it. And in a minute, I will actually show you a face of someone who had this scarification. Okay, this is a figure here of Oni. You can see the crown, the beads, which are very much a part of their regalia. You can see it around the neck, on the trunk of the body. And don't forget, these works were all produced between the 12th and 15th century. You know, and this isn't the earliest art. You know, as I said, the Igbo people of southeast Nigeria. There were some excavations made at Igbo Ukwu, which they say date from the 9th century. Even before that, there was a knot culture of central Nigeria, and their work has been carbon dated to the 5th century BC. So this wasn't the first art made in Nigeria, but this is probably the art which is the most well known, and you can see why. Okay, so as I said, the scarification. So now I'm going to show you the face of someone who carries this. I mean, they no longer do, but back in the day, this was a standard source of identity. So there we have it. It's only a small picture, but I hope that you can see it. The young man there. Hope that you can see that. So this wasn't a kind of a fabrication, you know. This wasn't, you know, the scarification that we see on these pieces of sculpture. You know, it wasn't a fabrication. This was an actual real representation of ethnic identity. Okay. So we go from the Ife head to sculpture of the Ogboni. Ogboni. Now, probably the outstanding motif of the Ogboni was his bulging eyes, because Ogboni, and the word Ogboni comes from the Yoruba word Ogbon, which means peace, which means wisdom. The Ogboni were like, how can I say, they were like the Grand Council of justice. They were like the higher court, but they dealt with domestic issues as well as, you know, up to crimes such as murder. Ogboni. there is a kind of a reformed Ogboni, because as you can imagine, with the coming of Christianity, a lot of the ancient and traditional practices were downgraded. So there is an Ogboni still going, but it's called a reformed Ogboni, but it doesn't carry the same kind of power that the original council did. And they were all also there to keep the Oba in check. You know, he couldn't just kind of issue decrees willy-nilly. You know what I mean? Kind of, there had to be consultation, and they even had the you know, if they felt that he needed to be removed, then they were the ones who facilitated that. Okay, so as I say, one of their outstanding motifs is the bulging eyes, which kind of represents insight, you know, wisdom. Okay, Ogboni. Okay, these are the Ibeji, which means twins. Now, the Yoruba women, for some reason, appear to produce twins more than any other women of the world. And one example of that is one of the artists of the modern world, who is actually called Twin 77. He's called that because he was the only surviving child of 7 sets of twins. Yeah, 7 sets of twins. And he became known as Twins 77. So the Ebeji, which means twins in Yoruba, they are kind of venerated in Yoruba society. They're seen as bringers of good fortune. So when they die, they are commemorated in this sculpture. If one of them dies, then just one is sculpted. But if 2 of them die, then as you can see, there's a sculpture in a tandem. The blue was originally dyed using indigo, but as time went on, various other things have been used. But originally, it was indigo, which grew in Yoruba land. Okay, and these figures were kind of prayed to. They were dressed. They were sacrificed to. They were anointed. Yeah, they were seen as bringers of good fortune, twins. So a woman that kind of was a producer of twins was obviously very much praised and venerated. And this is one of the symbols of a Yoruba heart, the kind of crested conical headdress. Okay, as you can see in this figure here as well. Okay. What I'm going to do now is, even before I read this, before I show you that, what I'm going to do is read this for you, because when we think of the Yoruba, we tend to think of southwest Nigeria, or if we think of England, mostly Nigerians that we're going to meet or bump into come from the Yoruba people. But their spread went international because they were amongst the people that were enslaved, as well as other people from West and Central Africa. But as well as muscle, you know, because that's what the Africans were wanted for their muscle, to go and work on their various plantations. But what happened, they also brought spirituality. This is something that kind of remains. Slavery, as we know it, that style of slavery is no more, but the spirituality which they generated is still there. And even though they had to put a Christian, a Catholic veneer over it, it retained its African essence. So this piece here celebrates the kind of spiritual beliefs throughout the Americas, which have a foundation in the Yoruba religion. Okay. Enslaved boy thrown overboard, another black cadaver in the Atlantic cemetery. But he remains, he lives, for they wanted manpower, but his fellow captives brought God power too. On the beach in Bahia, they celebrate Umoja, Yoruba, Yoruba. Let's take a journey then, you and I, through Brazil and Venezuela, to see and hear Macumba, Yoruba, Yoruba. Into Mexico and Panama, honoring the Orishas, Yoruba, Yoruba. Uruguay and Argentina, Oloron and Oduduwa, Yoruba, Yoruba. Puerto Rico and Cuba, to experience Santeria, Yoruba, Yoruba. Let's go to Brazil, you and I, to the beach in Bahia, the festival of goddess Umoja, Yoruba, Yoruba. Okay, now we're going to take it into the modern era and into the contemporary era through one of the great sculpting families of the Yoruba, which are called the Fakaye. So we're going to start off with one of the greatest called Lamidi. Now, over time, he was given the title of Living Treasure by the UNESCO. And for me, he's like the goodwill ambassador of sculpture, because he was brought up as, you know, in a traditional Yoruba household. But then as a young man, converted to Islam, but then went on through Father Carroll. Now, Father Carroll is one of the, you know, when I think of colonialism, I think there's certain things to be discarded and there's certain things to remain. And I think the story of Father Carroll is one of the stories that need to remain. He was a Catholic priest working in Yoruba land, and he set up a sculpting workshop, and he encouraged the Yoruba sculptors such as Lamidi Fakaye to sculpt items for the churches, but using Yoruba symbolism, which I think is a great idea. And he was the one who gave Lamidi Fakaye his first commissions. So when I think of colonialism and, you know, kind of the good and the bad, that is definitely one of the great and lasting legacies. So as I said, he grew up in a traditional Yoruba household, converted to Islam as a young man, went on to sculpt items for Christian churches and also for Yoruba institutions, defying the Islamic kind of taboo on figurative depiction. So for that, I think of him as the goodwill ambassador of Yoruba sculpture. Okay, so let me show you some of his artwork here. So he started to sculpt in the 40s and 50s. Okay. These are various figures such as diviners and such people. But this is one of my favorite. Now this is a veranda. Now this is a veranda pose. Now imagine having that on your veranda. You know, you had a hard day at work and you know, it's the evening and you're sitting out on the veranda and you would just sail away looking at this. You know, your kind of troubles would ebb away, and you would just sail away, because I look at this and I think, you know, kind of, it looks like a dignitary with the staffs of office. So could it be an Ogboni figure about to give a judgment? Could he be an ambassador on a diplomatic mission to another Yoruba city-state such as Oyo or Owo? Could it be the spokesman of the Oba, who's about to give a decree, the latest decree? It's brilliant. So this is a veranda post. Okay. Now, before we look at his nephew, Bisi Fakaye, I just want to read, which I think is a beautiful quote by a researcher who met him. This is what she says. When I just moved to Surulere 4 years ago, my Friday afternoons with Baba Fakaye were sacred. Whatever I was doing during the week, I would make sure that every Friday at 4 p.m, I'd drive out to the National Theatre to have a cold star with Baba under the mango tree in front of the Universal Studios of Art. We would watch the egrets poking their beaks in the grass of the meadows surrounding the theatre, see swarms of dragonflies flitting over the marshland further down, and discuss the ripeness of the mangoes. We would eat roasted yam with palm oil and he'd buy smoked fish from the baskets that the vendors carried on their heads. I met Bisi Fakaye, a nephew of the famed sculptor Lamidi Fakaye and a sixth-generation artist of that family, at the Universal Studios of Art while I was looking for an apartment in Surulere. I was smitten both with his work and with our afternoon chats. Baba would tell me, "Hurry slowly, Funke," when I was doing a million things at once. He would ask after my mother in the Netherlands, as if he'd already met her, which he eventually would. When his health no longer allowed him to travel all the way from Iraduku to the studios in Surulere, I also stopped coming. But I cherish the memories of those afternoons with Baba Fakaye at the National Theatre. I remember the art students doing internships coming to greet him before going home for the weekend, and how he had a little joke for every one of them, or his moral boosting talk with a female aspiring artist. We have plenty of male artists around, but you are a woman, you are born to create. Which I think is a lovely thing to say. Okay, so we looked at the art of his uncle, which was in a more kind of traditional form. Now, he started sculpting in the 60s and 70s, and you can see the difference here. Right, we'll just focus on the two on this side of the page. So this one is called Town Crier. So you can see the bell. So each time he made a pronouncement, he would ring the bell. And this one is called Supplication. And as you can see, it's a penitent or someone in prayer. Okay. Beautiful. Beautiful. You can see how he's still using traditional Yoruba symbolism, but he's taking it a step further. More kind of elongation in his work. Okay, and before I go on, I just want to recommend this book, Artists of Nigeria. Now, it costs about £70, I think, but if you want a book which is going to give you a real insight, in depth actually, into Nigerian art, past and present, I do recommend this. It is brilliant. I was lucky because I wrote to the publisher, asked if I could do a review on the book, and so they sent me it. But this is a brilliant book. It really is. This is one that I would recommend. And while I'm at it, let me just say the books that we've been using out through the series. There's another one here. Africa, Land of Spirits. That's the Hemba. Sigiti figure, an ancestral figure. Remember the Hemba from the Congo that we featured in the first lecture called Serenity. It's another one called Embodiments. This is the Fang figure, the Fang from Gabon. Remember that this is one of the most sought after artwork, the artwork of the Fang, whether as figures or as masks. And great collectors such as Charles Ratton, Jacob Epstein, Helena Rubinstein, all had Fang art. And then, as we come back to today, here's one here. Frank Willett, he's one of the great figures of Nigerian art, as well as William Fagg. These were both Europeans, Frank Willett and William Fagg. And as I say, this is said to be a sculpture of a female dignitary. Yeah, with a beaded crown. Okay. And this one here, another one by Frank Willett. Okay, so I hope that today's lecture has been able to show you some of the great naturalistic sculpting that went on. A lot of the art that I've shown you in this series is idolized figures, but this actually shows you the naturalism that was produced and why people such as Attenborough and Professor William Bascom, Ben Ockrey and such people were kind of in a reverie about their art, and why, yeah, their art deserves to be up there alongside the naturalistic depiction that was given to us by the artists of Greece and of Italy. So I hope that I've been able to introduce you to that, and also to kind of give you some kind of a background to the Yoruba people and their heartland, IFE. Thank you very much.